The new McCrispy Strip is here. Dip approved by ketchup, tangy barbecue, honey mustard, Sprite, McFlurry, Big Mac sauce, double dipped in buffalo and ranch, more ranch, and creamy chili McCrispy Strip Dip. Now at McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/Wondery.
Bombas makes the most comfortable socks, underwear, and T-shirts.
Warning, Bombas are so absurdly comfortable you may throw out all your other clothes.
Sorry, do we legally have to say that?
No, this is just how I talk, and I really love my Bombas.
They do feel that good. And they do good, too. One item purchased equals one item donated.
To feel good and do good, go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
I'm Lola Blanc.
And I'm Megan Elizabeth.
And we're the hosts of Trust Me, the podcast about cults, extreme belief, and the abuse of power.
Now on Podcast One.
We want to debunk the myth that people who join cults are uneducated, because anyone can be manipulated by a narcissist.
And we should know we both have been.
Join us every week as we explore the world of extreme belief,
talk to survivors and experts,
and share our own experiences with cults and the abuse of power. Get new episodes of Trust Me every Wednesday on Podcast One and anywhere you get your podcasts.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. Today on the prosecutors, we dive into the defense case in the Murdaugh trial. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my honeyed co-host, Lick Lick.
You know, at this point, with so many episodes under our belt, I thought I would be prepared with whatever pronunciation you got. But, man, Lick Lick, that is so cringe, just like all of the pawpaws and the roros and everything that's about to happen in the defense case with, well, I'm not going to give it away, but some people who get on the stand who come up with the most ridiculous nickname. So thank you for giving my own name the most ridiculous nickname I've ever heard. And if any of y'all out there ever call me Lick Lick, I will make you hurt.
You know, I was really running out of alternative pronunciations for your name, so it was really a saving grace that all of a sudden nicknames became like the thing in this trial. So just gosh. Like you said, as we're getting to the defense case came through for me. So thank you to Pooty Poot and to Alex Murdaugh.
Oh my gosh. So, you know, we are currently recording this episode as closings are happening. So just so you guys know where our head's at and what we've been watching today, obviously you're going to hear this quite a bit out after likely there's a verdict. But people have been posting all these amazing memes and like cheat sheets about nicknames. And like in any other trial, I would say that it was an exaggeration. But in this case, I really did need a cheat sheet for all the nicknames, even though I've been following it.
And it's funny because I've seen some of those cheat sheets and I'm always like, did they make that one up? But I think they're all real.
They are all real. So anyways, you guys, we're already jumping in. If you are listening to us for the first time today, you should really go back and listen to the beginning of the Murdaugh trials because there's been so much going on. Brett just stepped off an airplane from the ski slopes and he's like, Alice, all I want to do is talk Murdaugh with you because he's that committed. And
just that committed.
Just that committed. So, and
also Alice is still pregnant at this point. Because you've been following the saga of Alice's pregnancy, still pregnant.
Okay, you guys, we have no idea at this point. We said the Murdaugh series was going to be 6 episodes. We're I don't know, on episode 8 at this point. I think we're going to go 4 more episodes. There's an eviction date for my baby, and the eviction date is in approximately 4-ish days. Our goal is to finish recording before the eviction date. And who knows? This is just like the trial. Who knows what the outcome will be? Let's see.
It is really a race because we need the jury to go ahead and come back with a verdict before Alice gives birth so that we can do a live episode on the verdict. So I've got my fingers crossed for a Friday afternoon verdict, but we'll just have to see. Like Alice said, by the time you guys are hearing this will all be old news, but that's what we're sort of doing as this case continues to unfold.
With that, okay, we got through the prosecution. The defense, we've always said this, the defense does not have to put on a case, but especially in a case like this one where the story matters, right? People have been talking about the motive. Motive is not an element you have to prove, but everyone's been talking about the motive. What would make a prominent, seemingly wealthy, powerful man turn and kill his own flesh and blood and his wife? Similarly, on the defense, all they have to do is create or point out reasonable doubt, poke holes in the prosecution's case, but really we know the best story wins. And so unsurprisingly, in a case like this, the defense puts on a case, and a pretty extensive case as far as defense cases go. Brett and I have tried cases where the defense literally puts no one on the stand. There's nothing at all. Their entire case comes out in cross-examination during the prosecution's case in chief. We've also tried cases that are more complex and more story-driven, kind of like the Murdaugh case, in which the defense does put on witnesses, but it's not uncommon to have just a few witnesses because you don't have to prove your case. You just have to tell another alternate story. And then the added element, of course, that happens in the defense's case is whether or not the defendant himself will testify. Well, we have all those elements here. So let's just have at it, Brett.
Let's have at it. And the defense, this is a case where they are going to call a lot more witnesses than you would typically see. And that's not surprising to me. We've talked about this before, the difference between having money and not having money. I'm not entirely sure where Alec has money to do this, given sort of the financial situation he's in, and you would think all his accounts would have been frozen. So I'm not entirely sure how he's paying these lawyers, but he is. They're staying at a very nice place, $20,000 a week, I understand. Whew. They clearly are well-funded. So one of the advantages to having money to spend and time to kill is the defense can call a bunch of witnesses. And usually what those witnesses are trying to do is, like Alice said, they're not necessarily trying to tell you what happened, but they're trying to muddy the waters a little bit, mess up that story that the prosecution has told by undermining some of their testimony, and maybe, if they can, developing their own story. And I think one thing you saw with this, there were a few suggestions of alternate possibilities about what happened, but really the focus of the defense was undermining the case that the prosecution had already presented.
Right. And you guys have seen this particular witness that they're going to call in the courtroom, I believe, every day. He may have stepped out for some parts of the testimony, but it's none other than the surviving son of Alex Murdaugh, Buster Murdaugh, also known as Bus. Also, Buster is not his real name. So, by the way, he has a nickname for his nickname.
Why is it Buster? Yeah, Buster a good enough nickname? Who can say?
I'm sorry. We're not going to fix it. No, we are. We absolutely are going to fixate on names because the real character in this entire trial is probably the nicknames that everyone has. So Buster is called to the stand. And Buster, as you all know, is Alex's oldest son. He is the one who's been described as kind of maybe the calmer of the two brothers, the one who is less likely to flaunt the family name, the power, what have you. But obviously his name has come up a lot because he shares the family resemblance. He has very red hair, stands out, and has been kind of the subject of a lot of media attention ever since the Murdaugh dynasty kind of media fair has been going on. So he's not the first witness to be called, because obviously you can imagine that calling the son of the defendant is going to be a blockbuster witness. The defense lead with a couple of short witnesses who basically they're called to the stand to make the police investigation look bad. And they try to poke holes like, why didn't you do this? And you didn't even take pictures here, etc. But they're kind of up and down sorts of witnesses. I kind of think it's to get the witness count up. So it looks like the defense, they have to match the prosecution. If prosecution called X number of witnesses, the defense wants to at least say, we've also called that many witnesses because we have just as strong of a case. That's kind of my take on these short witnesses.
It almost has to be that, because the ones they called, to me, I get that it was to sort of attack the prosecution case, but like the coroner who just came off as this bumbling guy, I mean, I guess it was to attack the state's case, but it's not like the state really used the coroner very much. So it almost felt like he was a defense witness, and not just because the defense called him, but because it was somebody who's going to help the defense. And I didn't think it made the defense's case look good starting with that guy because he was so bad. But yeah, I mean, I think they had a couple reasons to do it. It almost felt like they were just passing time. They were just sort of finishing out that day before they could get to Buster, who was there, the start of their case.
Right. And we'll get into what Buster says, but essentially, a lot of you guys asked us, how was Buster? Like, how did it work out for the defense? And he was exactly what the defense probably wanted him to be. He is called to humanize Alex Murdaugh and to basically show how he is a good father. And that's exactly what he does. He wasn't there at the time. He can't testify to who was or was not there, what happened to his mother and his brother. And so he talks about something that he knows a lot about, which is guns. And how the Murdaughs have a lot of guns on their property, especially at the Moselle property, which is a hunting ground, and that guns are everywhere. It's not surprising that they have guns everywhere. And he also talks a bit about the absent-mindedness of his little brother, Paul, who's always misplacing his guns, which we've already heard about this before. Now, this is, again, he doesn't have any direct knowledge because, unless he can point anyone to where the missing guns are, where the missing blackout rifle is, or give us any insight on the types of guns that are being shot. Really, the point of this is to show that anyone could have come onto the property and found guns, that they're not necessarily locked away, that they're everywhere. If you've ever been on the property, you would know that you'd be able to access guns easily. This is not a situation where guns are kept under, key and lock. And he does that in a likable way. He has a nice demeanor about him. He speaks in a respectful manner. There's nothing that really is grating about him in terms of how he is. Now, the defense does play for him the "they did him bad" tape. Remember, we talked about that line that the prosecution really harped on Alec when the prosecution said that I did them bad versus they did them bad. We've already talked about how we thought it was a bit of a mistake for the prosecution to really harp on this, because even if it was a confession by Alec, the investigating law enforcement officer didn't follow up on it. And so it really seemed like an post hoc reasoning of what they heard. And of course, what do you think Buster thinks he heard? And half of you probably heard this too. He listens to the tape and he says, yeah, I listened to it and it sounds like my dad said they did him bad, not I. And he said that several times to him after the murders. And so this is, I think, a pretty effective rebuttal to that line of questioning in that tape from the prosecution. I don't think that was their strongest evidence. I don't think they should have stayed that long on that part of the tape, that they or I did them bad. And Buster really kind of just nips it in the bud, because not only can he talk about what he hears on the tape, he can also talk about conversations that are not taped, that back up what he hears on that tape. And Buster also provides context for his dad in general. He talks about how loving Alec is with his family and how destroyed he was by the deaths. Again, humanizing his dad for the jury. You just want to pick off that one juror who says, there's no way he could have done this to a son, because here's his other son talking about just how loving he is. Buster also says that he was with his dad pretty much nonstop after the murders, indicating that his dad would not have had time to hide the weapons. He was able to see how he was acting in the aftermath of the murders, that there was nothing to hide here. And he also, unsurprisingly, says that the family did not believe that Paul was driving the boat that killed Mallory Beach. Of course he's going to say that, by the way. They're like being sued. And Buster, because it's his estate, is being sued in the Mallory Beach case. I think they've now settled it. But that's kind of course, what do you think Buster is going to say? He's going to come down on the side of protecting his family.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't know what to say. You know, it's one of those things where Buster doesn't say anything you wouldn't expect him to say. And of course, and basically the cross-examination is very much a, you love your dad, you loved your mom and your brother, that sort of thing. Like, he's not going to get up there and say, oh no, he definitely said I did them bad, you know? Now, nevertheless, I think you're right. I think this and a couple other witnesses will mention that he said this multiple times to them. And basically the prosecution drops this. Once you get to the prosecution's closing, there is not a single mention of this tape and whether or not he said I did them bad or they did them bad. Now, I think it was a mistake to even bring it up, but this is obviously partially an example to do that. It is strange to me. Here's the thing. Buster was always going to say they didn't think Paul did that. I think this family was 100% convinced. They had brainwashed themselves that Paul was innocent. I think you hear this from just multiple different people. At some point, Alex's brother is going to be on the stand. He's going to say the boat case wasn't as big a deal as people made it out to be, which a lot of people took the wrong way. They took that as Mallory's death wasn't a big deal. That is not what he was saying. What he was saying is they didn't think Paul was going to be found guilty because he didn't do it. And I don't know, maybe this speaks to their ability to lie to themselves about their own family's shortcomings. I'm not sure, but look, Paul was driving that boat when he crashed. He was driving it. He was responsible. There's no question about that. But you hear this again and again from the Murdaughs and from their allies that, oh, no, Paul was going to get off. He was totally innocent. You hear that from the defense attorney who appeared on the HBO documentary, which has come up a couple times in the trial, much to his chagrin. But he even says the same thing, like, oh no, he was going to be acquitted. He wasn't going to be acquitted. He probably would have been convicted. But nevertheless, they keep saying this. In any event, it was sort of a big news story that Buster testified, but in the grand scheme of the trial, not a big deal. And this is the case with a lot of these sort of character type witnesses. They testify, that's great, doesn't move many people.
And this is probably a good time to talk about invoking the rule. So as you guys probably know, in this case, Buster sat through every witness, right? He was there every single day sitting behind his dad for the, media, cameras, his support, he and his girlfriend. And that's wonderful. I really do mean that, because it makes a difference for some jurors to know that your family is sitting with you, especially when you are accused of killing one of your sons. It's optically very helpful to have your other son sitting in support behind you day after day as the prosecution is calling you a monster. With that said, typically in criminal trials, the lawyers will invoke something called the rule. And we call it the rule because I don't even know what section it is, but it's called the rule with a capital R because it means that anyone who's going to testify in the trial cannot be in the courtroom to hear any other witness's testimony. And you can imagine why that is the case. You want to make sure that each witness is only testifying to their own knowledge and not changing their testimony, whether consciously or unconsciously, based on what they learn throughout the trial. So the reason we say that Buster said nothing surprising is that nothing was surprising because he got to hear every single testimony. He knew exactly where everyone stood on the guns piece. He knew to talk about the guns because it had been a big piece about whether guns were available, that it was a family gun that caused the deaths of his family members. And he can talk about the tape because he sat through the hours and hours of questioning regarding the they did them bad versus I did them bad. He's able to address them and essentially speak directly to the jurors on any questions they may have had from the prosecution's case. Why didn't they invoke the rule? I don't know. That's pretty unusual, honestly. But in this case, I bet you part of the reason is they wanted Buster to be able to sit behind his dad the entire trial for the very optics reason. I don't think they did it because they wanted him to be able to address the factual, rebuttals to the prosecution's case, because honestly, Buster is not an evidence witness he kind of is, but he's really more of a character witness. I think it made more sense for the defense to be able to show the loving son behind the loving father throughout a murder trial. And that might be a big reason why they didn't invoke the rule.
And weirdly, because they didn't invoke the rule, you had lawyers asking questions like, well, you heard this witness. You were in the court for that, right? Where this witness said this thing. And it's like, this is so strange because ordinarily none of those people would be there. The rule of sequestration, it's in one of the 600s. But basically, yeah, ordinarily no one who's going to testify is in the room because you don't want them to be influenced by what anybody else says. So that is a little unusual in this case, that you had so many witnesses just hanging out in the court the whole time, listening to testimony. And you got a lot of that. You heard this person say this, and you heard this person say that. Or even, well, you've heard the video. You know, you've been in the courtroom, you've heard the video. So it's an interesting thing, but it is definitely different from what you would normally see. In addition to Buster, so Buster's sort of a throwaway witness in a lot of ways. Well, then they kind of get into their thing, and they present probably one of their most important witnesses. The witness that's been talked about the most is this forensic reconstructionist. So they call a forensic engineer to provide a reconstruction of the murder scene. Now, this is an expert who's previously worked with the defense counsel, Jim Griffin in particular, on accident reconstruction and some of their civil cases. And in fact, he worked with Jim on the boat case. So he was one of the guys who was going to convince you that Paul wasn't driving that boat. So that should tell you something about this witness, but whatever. So he is now lending his expertise to this shooting, which is something he's done before. He's done these reconstructions before. He is qualified as a shooting reconstruction expert. And those of you who watch, there's a lot of questions about the schools he's attended, the trainings he's taken, and the number of times he's testified in court, and all this other stuff. And then they qualify him as an expert. It's pretty rare to get an objection to that. It does happen where the other side will say, we object to this person as a witness, and then they have to hash that out. He may have to answer more questions and provide more details. But if he's not qualified as a witness, he cannot testify because he's not a fact witness. He wasn't there. He doesn't have anything to offer from a factual perspective. The only reason his words are relevant is because he is qualified as an expert. So you have to make him an expert first. And then once he's an expert, he can give his opinions on the case. It's ultimately the jury's decision whether to take those opinions or reject them outright, but he can give his opinion, and he is qualified. So he has constructed this 3D reconstruction of what he believed happened. And this is fancy defense stuff that the prosecution doesn't always have. I mean, sometimes the prosecution will have cool little things like 3D reconstructions, but usually that's something that someone with a lot of money is able to do. Another advantage of having money is you can hire someone like this and make them do something like this. Much more powerful when you have a visual to go along with your testimony. The main purpose of his testimony is to show that 6'4" Alex Murdaugh probably didn't fire the weapons that killed Maggie and Paul. For instance, he says that the person who shot Maggie, if shooting from the shoulder, could have been no taller than 5'2". And he notes that at one point, one shot left the weapon at no more than 4 feet off the ground. Now, what is interesting about this to me is this is the kind of expert testimony which on the surface might sound plausible, but it is not hard to pick this apart because he is assuming that this person is basically shooting, standing at full height, the way you might at a firing range. Like you've got your weapon, you go down to the range and you have the perfect form and you put the gun up against your shoulder so you have really good stability and you pull the trigger and you start shooting, right? But this is not a shooting range. And given sort of how dynamic this scene is, and you have people moving, you have people running, and you have two different guns used, it's probably not surprising that these shots are coming from strange angles. Even the fact the 4-foot shot, this person, whoever it was, even if they were only 5'2", they have adjusted where they are standing when they shoot the gun. They have moved in some sort of way to drop the level of the gun. You could have somebody crouched down when shooting. You could have someone shooting on a knee, which is another way to stabilize, particularly if someone is running away from you. And this is particularly true for that second shot at Paul, which is a strange shot. We're not entirely sure how it happened, but it is from such a low, sharp angle that, as the prosecution will later speculate, it almost seems like the person is putting the gun down. and Paul surprises them and they sort of pull the trigger. It's from such a low position. But that's just an example of how you can't necessarily use the trajectory of these bullets and say, well, it had to be this short person. And just stand up, take a broom or something and imagine you're going to shoot. Like, if you crouch down just a little bit, you're already in the position that someone who is a foot shorter would be in if they were standing up fully. So to me, I didn't find this testimony to be particularly powerful, and it enabled the prosecution to do something that they have done multiple times, which is completely make fun of this. Like, the prosecution has now been talking about 5'2" 12-year-olds since they said this, to the point that a later defense expert is going to say he thinks the shooter's more like 6'2", which I don't know how that helps Alex Murdaugh, but nevertheless, this kind of turns on the defense.
And I thought, with expert testimony, obviously they're retained, they're paid for, you're paying for their opinion. And so the idea is you can basically pay for any opinion you want. But I thought it was strange to really fixate on the fact that this shooter could not have been more than 5'2", because this was a gruesome murder, right? And it's possible there are adults who are 5'2". Look, I'm not a very tall person. I'm 5'4", so I'm pretty close to this height. And my husband is a foot taller, and we actually demonstrate this all the time, where he often will crouch down, and we're the same height. And it's really funny because he looks like a child, kneeling down, and we actually have the same eye level. But someone of my height, could be a 12-year-old, could be an adult, could potentially commit this very gruesome murder. More likely it was a male with this type of aggression and who had an imposing presence, right? I mean, if it were someone random, if it were someone who you did not expect, so not your father, not your husband, but a random person who was looking to, I don't know, decimate a family, came onto this property, is probably an aggressor and probably a bigger person. So to fixate on the small size, I don't know. It was like they were building a trap for a joke for the prosecution to harp on. And look everywhere. I mean, there's all these jokes about 5'2" people, and no one's really remembered this particular expert saying it's impossible, because it's not. You can, as a shorter person, I can't become 6'4", but a 6'4" person can get themselves down to a 5'2" level.
Yeah, I don't know. I found it so unbelievable. And so, and this is the problem with expert testimony. Number one, experts can be bought and are bought. And actually, it's becoming more and more of a problem in the legal system and, all sorts of places in our society. It is very easy to buy expert testimony. And because they are experts, people believe them because they don't know any better. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a crime scene reconstructionist. If he says they got to be 6'4", I guess they got to be 6'4". And it's only when they're testifying on something that actually you may have some independent knowledge of, or just an ability to understand for yourself. No one who's ever shot a gun bought this. Nobody who's ever shot a weapon thinks that the only time you would shoot a gun, particularly in any kind of, dangerous situation, whether you're a police officer or in the military or just defending yourself from an attacker, that you are going to stand in the perfect position and shoot the gun. And I'll tell you, I was down at the range with one of our law enforcement agencies that we work with, and we had a Tommy gun that was 100 years old. It was pretty cool. And we were shooting it from the hip, and that's one way you can shoot it, from the hip. I mean, you can shoot it from the shoulder. Yeah,
I remember we used to play that game. I was maybe a little more civilized than you. No, I'm kidding. But I remember we would be if you could flip it over really quick like a cowboy, out of a holster and shoot from your hip.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, and once again, people are moving. There are multiple victims. One of them appears to have come at the attacker. I mean, if you think that Paul, we're going to get into this more, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves with how they were killed, but if you think that Paul sort of surprised the killer with the fact that the first shot didn't kill him, then from that point forward, the killer is going to be in a defensive position. So crouching down, staying low with your firearm is a smart thing to do. In fact, it would surprise me if a 5'2" person is going to stand fully erect with the gun up at their shoulder. They would also be crouched. So yeah, I found this to be completely unbelievable. And it wasn't just the size thing. The thing that was even more unbelievable and should be unbelievable to anyone who lives anywhere where you've ever heard a gunshot from your home was the testimony that you could not have heard these shots from the main house. So the main house is about 1,100 feet away as the crow flies. So 1,100 feet from the house to the kennels. And sound obviously is going to spread in a straight line. And it's more like a third of a mile if you drive there, so a little bit shorter in a straight line. In any event, he says, can't hear it. Couldn't hear these gunshots from the kennels. That's his testimony. The prosecution notes a few things that he did not take into consideration. He used a different gun and ammo. He will say on redirect that wouldn't make any difference. Who knows, but probably should have just used the same gun, same ammo. And there are trees between the house and the kennel that weren't there before that are there now. Now look, I don't care about all that. All I know is from where I live, I hear gunshots all the time that are more than 1,100 feet away. And I live in a place with lots of trees. And those are handgun shots. Yeah, I go to sleep serenaded by the sound of gunfire, and I don't live in a particularly dangerous neighborhood. There are dangerous neighborhoods near me. They're not 1,100 feet from me. And I've heard this before. I've been on my front porch with my dog and heard shooting, and my dog goes crazy, right? The idea that 2 shotgun blasts and 5 shots from an AR-15, that you could not hear those from the house, is absurd. Now, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because if you think Alex Murdaugh was at the house, then you just think he didn't do it, right? Even if he did hear shots, they're out there in the middle of nowhere. People shoot all the time. You could even imagine him just ignoring them. Frankly, I would have been more convinced by testimony that they're just shooting all the time. And so hearing shots wouldn't be a big deal because people are out there shooting hogs, which is, we heard a lot of testimony about shooting hogs. I'd be more convinced by that than there's no way you could hear it. So that was his testimony. Anyway, the prosecution attacks his qualifications a little bit. That's not really that effective. That happens all the time whenever you have an expert on redirect or on cross-examination. But that's what he testified to. And honestly, I felt like this backfired on the defense more than it helped them.
Yeah. And kind of back to, I know we're picking this apart, and we'll pick it apart more when we get to more defense witnesses. But if the defense had gone with the whole Moselle's a hunting grounds and we hear gunshots all the time, I'm glad that it goes to that story, because it's really unbelievable as well, because we are going to know later that there's no one else on the property, right? Murdaugh and his family have dinner and there's no one else there. It's not like they had friends come in. It's 9 p.m. It's dark out. He even says, I thought I heard someone pull up there, but there was no such thing. And they are hearing gunshots from another property because Moselle itself is many, many acres. It would have come from his property. And so don't you think if someone were shooting hogs on your property, you'd want to know who it is? And there's been no testimony that people would, come onto this gated property at dark to do, covert shooting. But they did say they shoot all the time during the day and with friends, but no friends were visiting that day. So there's already a lot of problems with their potential other storylines, but there's more to pick apart, so we'll keep going. The defense also call Mark Ball, who he's there actually the night of the murders, and he comforted Murdaugh. Mark Ball was there the night of the murders. He is a colleague of Alex at his law firm, and he goes there and comforts Murdaugh after these horrible murders on their property. And he's called to the stand to talk about how sad Alec was, how upset. And he's there, again, kind of as a character evidence witness to say how he responded. And also to comment, by the way, on how SLED did a poor job of controlling the scene. But lawyers usually are really bad on the stand for a number of reasons. They overthink things. They try to play the game. They think they're smarter than you. Well, his testimony kind of falls apart toward the end of direct, even before we get to cross-examination, when he answers the question by saying that he thought he knew Alec, which is never a good thing to start with when the defense calls you in support of Alec. And he says, I thought I knew Alec, but after September, which was, remember the roadside shooting when Alec hired someone to shoot him in the head, Mark said, I don't know him anymore. You can imagine, I don't know how the defense didn't know he thought this or was going to say this, but it was really sad to see him, right? He's on the stand trying to vouch for his friend, and I'm sure this is a devastating thing to go through. He probably knew Maggie and Paul very well as well, and they're dead. And then to end, it sounded very honest. It sounded very emotional that I don't even know who Alec is. This is someone that I had counted a friend, a colleague for years, and I just don't even know anymore. And you can imagine the cross is absolutely devastating on Mark. I mean, I was cringing as an attorney. I was like, oh, I hope I'm never crossed like this. But on cross, Mark Ball testifies that on 3 different occasions, Alec told him he never went to the kennels and he never saw Maggie and Paul again after supper. He also says that Alec's story changed about who he checked first, whether it was Maggie or Paul. He also says that Alec was very good at hiding who he was. He says that he had not heard the kennel video until a month before, but he didn't need to hear it again because he knew those voices. They were undeniably Maggie, Paul, and Alec. I mean, this is just devastating cross. It almost makes you think like, could the defense not get anyone better? Because you obviously prep your witnesses and you do mock crosses on your witnesses all the time. Just see how they would respond to very obvious questions. I would, of course, ask these questions. If you're there as soon as the murders happen to comfort Murdaugh, likely you spoke with Alec and he's going to have told you his version of events. And you would think that the defense would know the version of events that Alec told Mark would contradict with what came out in the videos and the strategy that the defense adopts once they hear the kennel video, which is to essentially not contest that the kennel video included Alec's voice. So this just completely, I mean, undermines the character of Alec, especially the whole ability to lie and keep who he was secret from those who he saw daily in his law practice, in his personal life. I don't know, Brett. That was, it was hard to watch, honestly, for him as well.
I don't know what they were thinking here. I know they wanted to have somebody testify about how uncontrolled the scene was, because a big part of their thing is, which is kind of ironic because the whole reason it's uncontrolled is because Alex Murdaugh is who he is and knows all the police, and so anybody could come and go that wanted to until SLED finally locked the place down. But nevertheless, that's one of the points. Like, all these people coming on the property, they're destroying evidence, they're leaving evidence behind that's not real evidence, sort of all that stuff. I get that. And there were a lot of his partners who were there, but man, this guy, just the longer it went, the more cringeworthy. I mean, I was just going down in my seat because it just gets worse and worse, and it continues.
Oh boy, does it continue.
So I've said it before and I will say it again. HelloFresh is one of our favorite sponsors. We love HelloFresh because you can get farm fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonable recipes delivered right to your doorstep. And maybe most importantly, they make home cooking easy and it's affordable. And that's why it's America's #1 meal kit. HelloFresh takes the hassle out of mealtime by delivering pre-portioned ingredients and easy-to-prepare recipes right to your door. You can skip the checkout lines and get outside in the warmer weather because HelloFresh has dinner covered. You guys know I love to grill, and I love the opportunity to put together some of HelloFresh's quick and easy meals. And these are things you can put together in 15 minutes or less. We're talking HelloFresh's fast and fresh pineapple chicken tacos or falafel power bowls. And if Alice was here, she would tell you her kids love it and they gobble it up. So go to HelloFresh.com/TP50 and use code TP50 for 50% off. Plus your first box ships free. That's HelloFresh.com/TP50 and use code TP50 for 50% off and free shipping on your first box. And find out for yourself why HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit. You know, if you're like me, probably the last thing you want to do is figure out who you're going to see for a doctor when you're not feeling great. I personally hate it. It seems hard. It seems difficult. That's where ZocDoc comes in. If you've been stewing about a health problem you have, you're resorting to texting your group chat, looking for some friend's opinion, don't do that. You're not going to find qualified medical advice in your group chat, but you can find it from a doctor on ZocDoc. And there are thousands of medical professionals on ZocDoc there to help you. They listen like a friend, but a friend who can actually give you the expert care you need. And there's nothing worse Then go into a doctor's appointment, expecting to be the center of attention, and then your doctor seems like they have better things to do and better places to be. On ZocDoc, you will find quality doctors who focus on you, listen to you, and prioritize your care. ZocDoc is the only free app that lets you find and book doctors who are patient-reviewed, take your insurance, are available when you need them, and treat almost every condition under the sun. No more Dr. Roulette or scouring the internet for questionable reviews. With ZocDoc, you have a trusted guide to connect you to your favorite doctor you haven't met yet. Millions of people are using ZocDoc's free app to find and book a doctor in their neighborhood who is patient-reviewed and fits their needs and schedule just right. It is time for you to join them. Go to ZocDoc.com/prosecutors and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then find and book a top-rated doctor today. Many are available within 24 hours. That's ZocDoc.com, ZocDoc.com/prosecutors. ZocDoc.com/prosecutors. The Prosecutors is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, while you're listening to us, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you can be doing right now. Getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy, and you could save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $700 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles in your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month saving of $698 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
So Mark then says that PMPED was very concerned about the threat and who did this. Of course, right? You have 2 dead people. You have additional members of the family who could be targets. But strangely, Alec didn't seem as though he was concerned about the threat, either to himself or his other family members. Although Mark does say that he doesn't know how he'd respond in that circumstance. That's a very lawyerly thing to say, and I think it's very honest. Everyone responds differently in different situations, but here you have law enforcement saying there could be an additional threat out there. We don't know who did this. 2 members of your family have obviously been targeted, right? They've been targeted on their property, shot with family guns in a part of the property that is not like easily accessible to someone just passing by. This isn't like the side of the road. This is interior to a gated property. It would be strange for Alec not to express any of these concerns. And here you have someone who knows him pretty well, who's there with him in the aftermath, saying just as much that he's not concerned. I get scared walking by your house, Brett, when I hear gunshots, and I'm not the target of those gunshots. It's kind of human reaction when there's a threat that close to you to ask the obvious next question. Am I in danger? Are the rest of us in danger? Should we leave this property right now? Are we being watched right now? That's why law enforcement are on high alert when they go to a situation like this, because they don't know if the threat has yet been neutralized. And Alec would know this because, remember, he has been a solicitor, a prosecutor before, and he knows these elements about crime scenes and about how violent murderers can continue to be a threat if not neutralized. And Mark, of course, because he lives in the Low Country. He's at the law firm with Alec, the one that Alec's, great-grandfather founded. And he talks about how important family legacy was to Alec. Talks about how his great-grandfather formed the foundation of the firm and the family dominated politics in the area for a century. This, I think, was to try and show, I don't know. I actually don't know, because you're already in the Low Country. The Murdaugh name is obviously very well known, and we know how important this family is to this area. And we also know the rumors around the family in terms of their abuse of power. And so for Mark to point out how important family legacy is to Alec, it begins to shed light on what lengths you would go to protect that family legacy. We've touched on this before in just kind of our assessment of what's going on, but to have your own law partner say that on the stand, I think is very damaging to show what's at stake. It's not just a boat case. It's not just $1 million in stolen, misappropriated funds for your clients. We're talking a century of family history and legacy to protect, which is a lot weightier than a boat case or a couple $1 million misappropriated or even an opioid addiction.
And Mark actually ends up on cross-examination for longer than he was on direct. Because he's such a good prosecution witness.
Not good for the defense, I mean.
And, you know, they're going through this with him. PMPED, as we said before, doesn't even really exist anymore. Now it's the Parker Law Group. We had said before that there were no Murdaughs in the firm. Apparently, there was some initial reporting that Randolph Murdaugh was going to go out on his own. Apparently, he has decided to stay with the firm, at least for now. I don't know how that's going to work out, frankly. I'm sure that his law partners are trying to show him grace and not blame him for the actions of his brother. But given sort of the amount of money that was lost, the loans the firm's having to take out to pay things back, it's a rough situation. And bringing this out through him to just show how important this was and keeping this afloat really was a great job by the prosecution of using a defense witness to continue to develop their theory of motive, which is what we've talked about a lot, that he had a lot riding on this. And if it was all going to fall down, it wasn't just him. It was the weight of a century on his back.
And Mark isn't even close to being finished on cross. Again, the defense had to have known all this, but still, I think it shows the weaknesses of the available witnesses to them. And I think the prosecution was, they were ready for Mark and they brought out all the right points. They then start asking Mark about Alex's time as the assistant solicitor. And he goes into the fact that Alec kept his badge on the corner of his car dashboard. So assistant solicitors are prosecutors. I mean, technically, we're part of law enforcement, depending on how general you want to be, because we're on the side of prosecuting cases. But we don't have law enforcement capabilities. We can't investigate cases. We're not supposed to write reports like police reports. We don't go out and answer 911 calls. We typically don't even sit in like squad cars when they're going out on business with their lights on because we're a liability. We can get hurt because we're a civilian. And so when you are given a badge, not every prosecutor, it depends on your jurisdiction, gets a badge, but oftentimes it looks like a badge. It looks like a police badge, and you use it to get into the courtroom or to, if you are at, a scene or something, you can show it to show that, there's a reason that I'm here, so I can get on the other side of the yellow tape. But it's not supposed to be a badge that carries with it weight like a police officer, a beat cop has. You can't take out the badge to arrest someone, for example. But Mark says that Alec was very proud of this badge and displayed it on his car dashboard. Why would you do that? Why would you put it on your dashboard? Of course, it's so that other people, i.e. the police, can see it and not pull you over, so that you can double park wherever you want, so you can speed. And if you're getting pulled over, they'll see the badge and think, okay, you're one of us. It's to wield power. It's not kept hidden away. And you have to really display it because it's usually within like a flap. There's a flap that covers it. You've all seen police movies where you flip your badge open and then you flip it closed. Same thing here. So it's not great that Alec likes to display his power despite already having a lot of power that's quite literally in his name and on his face.
And if it's not obvious to you all, you're not supposed to do that.
No, you're definitely not supposed to do that.
I used to have one of these.
You're not supposed to do that even when you're police.
Right. Well, that's true. I used to have one of these when I worked for the state, and they were very consistent about, you do not use this to try and get out of tickets or anything like that. Like, that is not the purpose for having this. It's for things like when you go to the court, so you don't have to go through security, you show your badge and they let you not go through security. It's for things like that actually affect your job and make your job easier, not to do what he did on multiple occasions, which is attempt to intimidate other people through the use of his badge.
And he also goes into the fact that, remember, we've heard about the century-long dynasty of the Murdaughs as the solicitor, not assistant solicitor, but the main prosecutor. And Alec was just a volunteer assistant solicitor, but Mark went into how Alec thought about running for the solicitor himself. He had noted that this was something he thought about. He wanted to maybe have the power, to have the title, to have the name, especially because his family had had it for a century. And I think it just shows the aspirations of Alec and how he thought of himself, right? This wasn't just a volunteer position in terms of giving back to the community pro bono. This had a stepping stone to something with more power and more influence within society. And here's another line of questioning that I thought was very effective on cross-examination. Mark is with Alec a lot. They are law partners. They know how the rhythms of each other because you see them every day. And he notes that Alec, like most of us, was always on his phone. And in fact, there was never a time when he didn't have it with him. Again, very common for a lawyer. I don't think my phone is never not next to me as a lawyer because I get, unfortunately, contacted about cases 24/7. I mean, truly, there's like never a time off. Lawyers always say that the best and worst invention for lawyers was like the BlackBerry, basically a phone device that was attached to you because at that time, before we had that time, if you left the office, then your work stayed at the office. But now that lawyers have access to the internet and their emails at all time, your clients have access to you 24/7 and they use that, right? So it's not surprising that this was Alec. But why is this important for the prosecution? We know that Alec, if he's always on his phone, then why did his phone go dark for an hour directly surrounding the murders? That's very suspect. Again, we show that any piece of information like phone usage in isolation may not be very powerful information. But if you're able to compare it to the manner in which the person typically acts, it can be very powerful. And that's what Mark is providing right now for the prosecution. At one point, the prosecutor asked Mark if Murdaugh, quote, effortlessly and easily lied to you for years and you didn't know it. His response was absolutely crushing. He said, didn't know it and didn't catch him. The way he was doing it was very, very cunning. I mean, by the end, Mark Ball, who had started off sounding somewhat sympathetic to Murdaugh, is veritably seething with anger at his former law partner sitting across from him. He talks about how Murdaugh stole from his best friend as well as his other clients. He talks about how angry he was at Murdaugh, how he had to call each client and tell them that Alec had stolen from them. I mean, this is the guy who literally had to clean up all of the decades of dirty work that Alec did. He was left holding the bag, quite literally. To call those clients, I can't even begin to imagine the probably tongue lashing he got from them, and not to mention how guilty he felt for not having been able to protect his clients from Alec's thievery. And Mark said that when he heard about the roadside shooting, he actually thought to himself, that jackass killed himself. I mean, whoa, Brett, he's saying this on the stand.
Yeah.
I mean,
and this, once again, defense witness.
Defense witness. And I said this the other day to someone. I said, the point of questioning, a really good questioner for testimony, whether it's cross-examination or direct, is to get a rise of emotion out of the testifier, whether that's anger or sadness or whatever. Because when someone has tapped into their emotions, they start speaking really freely, right? And so the prosecution has done it here. They have tapped into the really sensitive spot of Mark and how he feels about Murdaugh. All you had to know was that he was the one who had to call all these clients that Alex stole from to know that you could tap into that deep anger, that deep sense of injustice, because this is a guy who didn't do that to his clients. This is the lowest you can go as a lawyer. And not only did his law partner and who he thought was his friend do this, but he was the one who had to clean up the mess. And so I'm not surprised he ended up speaking so freely, because by this point, he probably was like, finally, that Pandora's box of emotions opened for him that he probably tried to tamp down for a long time because he still worked at the Murdaugh family law firm. Now, after he said he thought that Alec killed himself, someone corrected him and actually said, no, Alex been shot. But even when he was given that clarifying information, at the time, Mark still did not believe it. And of course, we now know that Mark was right. And he said that he knew at the time that Murdaugh had to have set up this roadside shooting. And he also agreed with the prosecution that when Alec faced accountability for his actions, he manufactured a situation in which he was the victim. If the prosecution could have asked Ball if he thought Alec had murdered his family, he honestly probably would have said yes by the end of this line of questioning. But it doesn't matter. They did not have to ask that question because it came through loud and clear. I mean, he was a devastating witness for the defense, even though he was called by the witness himself.
And I don't know what to say about this. I don't know why they'd call this guy. They obviously just, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. The problem with calling any of his law partners is they all feel so betrayed. And it is very easy to just ask them, didn't he lie to you all the time? Didn't you believe it? You know, do you believe him now? And they're going to say no. And that's what happened here. And, you know, the prosecution had called one of Murdaugh's law partners earlier, and the testimony was very similar to this. It was very heated, very angry. And I don't know what they were thinking, but they decided it was so important to get the fact that this man and several other people were on the property the night of the shooting, possibly disrupting the scene, that they were willing to take this. They had to know this was coming. Maybe they didn't know it would be this bad. Maybe they thought there's no way he'll say all those things with Alex sitting right there. I mean, that's a possibility. Maybe they thought that, but he and the funny thing is, I was about to say he didn't hold back, but he did hold back. Even when you're watching it, you can tell he's trying not to be as aggressive as he could be, but he just can't help it. There's just too much and it comes out.
Yeah, I thought he was very staid. I did not think that he was unleashing like decades of pent up hate and anger at Murdaugh. It was quite the opposite. Like, it took some peeling of the onion to get where we were. That's why I thought the prosecution was so effective, is they slowly peeled that onion effectively to the point where Ball was like laid bare and he was just answering the questions before him. And the answers with kind of no embellishment were already so damning to Murdaugh's case. So I know, Brett, you called it. You completely called it. You said that basically Alec's going to have no choice but to testify because there have been so many lies and he might be the only one who could save himself. But we also know who Alec is. And he's like, you know, a narcissist who's not going to come off well on the stand. And so honestly, it was no surprise the morning of the trial when it came out that Alec was going to testify, and he is going to testify next. But before we get to him, we're going to have to save it for the next episode because there's too much to talk about with Alec. So before we talk about Alec's testimony, let's wrap up the defense's case and the prosecution's rebuttal. Then we'll come backwards to Alec's testimony. So the defense calls a couple experts to dispute the prosecution. This is pretty typical, of course. One of them says that Paul was murdered by a shot to the back of the head from above instead of one from below, as the prosecution expert had testified. The strange thing about this expert's testimony, though, is if the shot came from behind versus in front, then it puts the killer at 6'2". If that happened, which seems more likely that Alec was the shooter than the 5'2" little person from the first expert, it's like the defense is fighting with itself. So it's not really clear what they're trying to do here. But the point of this is to show that maybe there were two shooters, a 5'2" person and a 6'2" person. I don't know. A father and son duo. I don't know. But none of it rings very true, to be honest, because the defense's experts are essentially fighting with each other. And on rebuttal, the prosecution recalled a couple experts. And this really was an example of a battle of the experts where one side clearly won. I thought the prosecution's rebuttal generally was excellent. I thought it was very tight. They didn't have to lay foundation anymore. This is just rebuttal. So they got to get to the point and lay out their story very succinctly in the rebuttal. And I thought it was great. And they did. They called these experts. And by the conclusion of the expert testimony, it was at best a wash, which I think is fine because the prosecution can point to the shooter. We don't need to, theorize about the height of the shooter. They basically are saying, look, forget all this hogwash you've heard about from behind, from in front, 6'2", 5'2". We know who the shooter was because we know what the guns are. And the prosecution also called the sheriff who Alec testified had given him permission to put blue lights in his car. Brett, I'm laughing because, like, goodness gracious, Alec is like not doing anything to help himself. He puts his badge on his dashboard. He installs blue lights, which clearly is only for like squad cars. No prosecutor should ever have blue lights in his car. And of course, Alec said, oh, no, I got permission from the sheriff to put blue lights in the car. By the way, the sheriff would not have the authority to grant him that, luxury. And so they called the sheriff, and the sheriff's like, no, that never happened. Of course, I didn't say that he could put blue lights in his car. I don't know. I don't know if you saw that, but it was like so laughable because it wasn't laughable at the time, right? It shows how high the Murdaughs were riding and how far they've fallen. That would be hilarious to any layperson. We all know we can't have blue lights in our car. Are you kidding? We cannot pretend to be police. And here he was, like, so easily lying about it, not only by installing the blue lights in his car, but so easily lying that the sheriff said I could do it. Not even like a police officer, a lineman, but like the sheriff said I could do this, which is completely and easily disprovable, and they were able to disprove it. But again, it kind of shows how no one asked questions for a very long time of Alec, which again shows the narrative of how he was able to get to where he was, having stolen millions and millions of dollars, and to kill his own family with no one asking questions for so long. Okay, the prosecution's not done with the rebuttal. They also recall an expert to throw a phone around for a while to see whether or not the backlight comes on when you throw it. And the expert says that it doesn't. Now, the defense objected to this. And by the way, the backlight of the phone, remember Maggie's phone? When I just said Maggie, I was like, who's Maggie? Oh, right, Mags. Because I've only heard Mags for so long. Because remember Maggie's phone, the backlight came on momentarily at one point after the time we think she was shot before it turned off completely. And the idea is that just because it's thrown, the backlight doesn't come on, but someone actually has to look at it. And the defense objected to this rebuttal testimony, saying it wasn't really science, but the judge overruled that objection and allowed testimony on that point.
And I saw a lot of people criticize this witness because it seems so slipshod. The defense was like, did you write a report on this? Did you record your methodology and all this other stuff? And he's like, no, I didn't do that. I just threw the phone around. and I mean, look, the jury's not really supposed to do experiments on their own. They're supposed to only look at the evidence. So basically you had somebody come in and say, if you throw an iPhone, the light won't come on. And which is true, by the way.
I tried
throw your iPhone.
I think we all did.
There you go. Don't sue me when you smash your iPhone. But yeah, if you throw your iPhone, it won't turn on because it's not meant for that kind of movement. It's smart enough to know movement where the light should come on and drain the battery and movement where it shouldn't. So people criticize this witness. Whatever. I thought he made a good point, and now the jury's heard it, and they can, consider that when they're back there arguing about whether or not this whole thing is significant. I will tell you, a lot of the stuff they argued about in this case, when the backlight was on, when it wasn't on, when the steps were recorded, when they weren't recorded, when the orientation changed, I was just like, I don't care about all this, and this all seems very confusing. I'm not sure when it can do this and when it can't do this, but none of this really moves me one way or the other. I don't know if people were really moved to believe in the guilt and innocence of Alex Murdaugh about when the backlight came on. Maybe you were, but for me, I just thought, look, all the other evidence is either going to convict him or not going to convict him. If he's guilty, then he got lucky when he threw it and the light didn't come on. That was the kind of thing. And I think when you hear experts, people always ask us, how do you decide whether whether you should listen to this expert or that expert? We have two experts who are disagreeing. I think the best way to do it is, does it fit with your own experience, number one? And number two, are they making a statement that could be true and might not be true? And an example of this is the sort of next witness who's going to testify, or maybe the next one, the one Alice talked about earlier, the one who said the shot was from a 6'2" person shooting down. And on rebuttal, the prosecution, their witness pretty much just took that apart. And by the end, I was like, oh no, it definitely came from below, which honestly kind of surprised me that the defense would argue the other, because as Alice said, then that just means it could have been Murdaugh doing it. But nevertheless, the reason he said some of that was, one of the things he said was, well, if you did it, there would be this blowback and it would hit you and it would probably daze you and you wouldn't be able to put down a gun and pick up another gun and use it in that situation. Okay, he says that. Do we know for certain that's true? That's not a concrete fact like a trajectory or something like that. That's just what he's saying. So if all the other evidence points to it being one person, the fact that the expert testifies that he doesn't think that one person will be able to do it, that's the kind of opinion I think you can very easily disregard, because he's just giving you sort of the, in general, this is the way it would be. But if the other evidence contradicts that, you can disregard that expert. And that's one way you can look at expert testimony. And I just found a lot of this to be, at best, a wash, and at worst, for the defense, I thought the prosecution's experts did a much better job in the aggregate of describing the scene and what probably happened than some of the defense experts who seem so rigid. It's like the shooting, that he had to be 5'2" because you only shoot from this one position. Like, no, that's just too rigid, and that's not the kind of expertise I think that's particularly helpful.
Finishing up on the prosecution's rebuttal, the prosecution recalled one of Alex's law partners, Mark Crosby, who testified that he told him on multiple occasions that Alec checked Maggie and Paul before he'd called 911. A problem for him due to the 20 seconds between the time he arrived back at the kennels and calling 911. It's hard to check, pull up, park, run out, and check two people who are not directly next to each other multiple times. On cross-examination, our Pootie Poot got into a shouting match with Mark Crosby when Poot accused him of lying because he was mad at Alec. Now, if you guys saw this in real time, I thought it was completely ineffective because I thought Mark came off very reasonable. I mean, he was trying to keep his emotions under control and saying basically, you don't want to go there, man. Like, I'm testifying like a rational person and you're making me go somewhere you don't want me to go. And he's a lawyer. Who is the one who's really coming off bad, really berating the witness at this point. And I mean, he doesn't stop. I mean, Pooh is like, he is, I don't know, auditioning for a Lifetime movie or something. But at one point, he asks if Mark thought Alec was guilty, to which the partner replied that he wasn't privy to all the information the jury had heard, which is a very, contained answer, right? Because that was such a stupid question. I think most people who were asked that question on the stand after being screamed at by the defense counsel would have answered in the affirmative. And so I think,
what if Crosby had said, well, Mr. Poot, after seeing the evidence, of course he's guilty. I mean, what if he just said that? It would have been like, oh my goodness.
It showed you how I don't think Poot was in control of himself. That was a very dumb question for him to ask. And I don't think he had full control of his faculties at that point, because there are things you do for dramatic effect. That was a stupid question. That was a very stupid question of him. And I thought Mark Crosby came off great. I thought Poot came off terribly. And it was a great rebuttal witness for the prosecution. Because again, it seems genuine. And I will say this, seeing so many of his law partners on the stand reminded me that we've been living in crazy Murdaugh world where the things he says really are as crazy as you think they are. There are lawyers who can get on the stand and sound believable and have genuine feelings and not speak in a way the way that Murdaugh speaks, which is like this completely inability to see fault in himself or to speak in a way that is convincing to other people. And these are his law partners. These are his cohorts. And I thought, for me, at least with Mark Crosby being screamed at on the stand, heightened for me just how unlikable Alec would be on the stand.
And with that is essentially the case. That is all the witnesses except for one, and that's Alex Murdaugh, who testified over the course of a day or so, if you put the times together, about a day. And it was riveting testimony in so many ways. We're going to walk through it, both what he said on direct and what he said on cross. And the most important thing from his testimony was that kennel video. We've been talking about it a lot. All the people who've gotten on the stand and said, that's him in the video, and how it directly contradicted the statements that he had made multiple times to police about where he was in the minutes before his family was killed. And we had said, the only person who can explain this is him. He has to testify. And at the end of the day, he did testify and he did attempt to explain that. We are nearing the end. We're going to talk about him and then we're going to go through our theories. Who knows, Alice? Maybe we can finish in one more episode. Either way, this is going to match our longest series ever. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I will tell you, we have been restrained on this one. I mean, we really have. We could have spent 20 episodes on this case. But like I said, we've been restrained. We haven't gone off on as many tangents as we could have because we're trying to keep it tight. If you can call 9 hour and something long episodes tight, maybe 10, who knows?
With
we'll
all
see
the
where
lives.
we get to. And then there are the lives. But look, this is in some ways, we're not going to have another trial like this until, at least next year. So like this one has been it's been a trip. And obviously there's a lot of tragedy that undergirds this case, but I hope you also can appreciate, and I think people can, and that's why this has been such a phenomenon, the just riveting nature of this. This is reality television at its finest. Hilarious at times. Juror got kicked off today, and she had to make sure she had her dozen eggs before she left, which for some reason she'd brought a dozen eggs to the jury room. Not really clear why, but that's the kind of stuff that happens on a regular basis.
I have no idea. Are they
case.
uncooked eggs? Are they hard-boiled? Are they scrambled? There's so many questions.
Yeah, are they going to hide eggs like during the break? Is it like a pre-Easter routine? I'm not sure. You guys have had tons of comments and questions about this case. I know you're going to continue to send them to us, but please do. prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod on all your social media. Hello to all of you listening early and ad-free on Patreon, and to those of you watching on YouTube. We really just put these things on YouTube so you guys can listen to them on YouTube. So thank you to those of you who watch anyway and just, watch the pictures we put up to fill your television screen. We always enjoy your commentary as well. Well, Alice, is there anything else you want to say before we sign off for today?
Guys, hold on to your hats because the whole timeline's about to change when Alec gets on the stand. So basically strap everything we've talked about for the last 8 episodes and come back for the next episode because boy, does a lot change, and you're going to want to come back for it.
Yeah, it's so funny because if you knew he was going to testify, we could have done this trial in like a week, or we could have done our episodes in like two episodes, because it really does. When a defendant testifies, it all comes down to what they say. In some ways, it's good to testify when there's a lot of evidence against you, because it is easy to forget all the evidence and just focus on what the defendant says. And it can be one of the advantages for Alex Murdaugh is so many people, they focused on, do I believe him? Does he seem believable? And what they didn't do is compare the evidence to what he was saying. And that's what you have to do. And that's what we're going to do next week. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. Do want to give a shout out. I don't think she's here, to Leah D, who of least of these podcasts. She is filling in for Alice this week. She'll be on this week's Legal Briefs, talking about an interesting case. Those of you on Patreon have already received that episode, and I hope you enjoyed it. She's great. You guys should go listen to her. It's okay, Joe. It's just, man, basketball always breaks your heart. learn that from a young age.
It's true. Well, thank you guys. You guys are the best. I'm going to go off camera because Sweet Girl probably needs to hang out.
All right.
Okay.
I'll see y'all later.
Bye, y'all.
Love you, mean it.
Bye.
Bye.
All month long on Pluto TV, stream the biggest Tyler Perry movies free. Watch your favorites like Medea's Witness Protection and Medea's Big Happy Family. Join Tyler Perry as he goes on a couples retreat with Sharon Leal in Why Did I Get Married? Or Idris Elba and Gabrielle Union in the Tyler Perry directed film Daddy's Little Girls. Plus, Pluto TV has hundreds of channels with thousands more movies and TV shows. Available on live and on demand. Download the free Pluto TV app on all your favorite devices and start streaming now. Pluto TV. Drop in, watch free.